We're happy to have with us today, retired Brigadier General Gilbert S. Harper. Gil graduated from the United States Military Academy and has a master's degree in math from Stanford. Anybody needing help balancing their checkbook, he'll see you after the program. And he also has studied at Harvard's Kennedy School. When he retired from the U.S. Army, he was commanding general of the U.S. Army Transportation Center and School. He's also commanded transportation companies in Germany, Saudi Arabia, Somalia, and all over the United States. In retirement, he's been busy. He spent 3 years with the Penguin Group, which is the second largest trade publisher in the world, with more than 4,000 individual titles that they sell. He then served 3 years as managing director of Pearson Shared Services in the United Kingdom, which is an international media company with more than $8 billion in annual sales. Gil and his wife Christine moved to Charleston in 2008. He started doing some consulting work and teaching. He taught at the Citadel and College of Charleston and has taught over his career as adjunct professor with 6 different universities. They moved to Greenville, came to their senses, moved to Greenville in 2023, and he spends his time now serving on some nonprofit boards, doing some consulting, writing, speaking, and traveling. His most impressive accomplishment was persuading Chris to marry him. I have seen Chris's resume. She has got a very incredible resume and is a writer, speaker, educator, trainer, historian, volunteer, and traveler, having visited 98 countries and all 7 continents. Now that says of 2022. I suspect that number is higher now. But I'm pleased to welcome to the podium Gil Harper.
Well, I mean, first off, I've got to give a shout out to Bob Howard. I don't know of anybody in this time that has done more for this club or more for this town than this gentleman right here. And he has such a wonderful way with words. I mean, I was so excited about the speaker that I realized he was talking about me. Now, one of the things you learn as an old soldier, everything is done with a task, a condition, and a standard. Task today is I give a presentation. The condition is you listen. And the standard is we finish at the same time. I'll do my part. I hope you'll do yours. I am going to have to sit there and say on the remark about mathematics. One of the things I learned in upper mathematics, there are 3 kinds of people in this world. Those who can count, those who can't. I have the next. If we're going to talk about Pearl Harbor, you just can't start off in 1941. You have to look before. You have to see what's brewing. And there were a lot of pre-war tensions. Turn of the century, Japan was transitioning from isolation into being a world power. They had fought successful wars in China against the Russians. They had fought on the Allied side in World War I. And they were feeling their oats. But also, like so many other countries, they were feeling the effects of the Depression. And they saw China as one of the ways to get out of that depression. Not only the minerals and other things were there, the markets, but they also saw the Western powers excluding them from what they thought was their own backyard. This led to sanctions. This finally led to embargoes by the U.S. on oil, which they had none, was crucial, and other war materials. So from a Japanese standpoint, you're poking the bear. Now, was there a plausible threat of war? Well, Billy Mitchell in 1920 said there was, and he drew a lot of criticism for it at the time. In 1932, Rear Admiral Yarnell conducted a fleet problem. This is a simulated war game. And he knew the Japanese and he studied them. Now, you remember, this is 9 years before Pearl Harbor. And he said, you know, the guys at Pearl Harbor are going to expect me to come in with battleships. And he left all the battleships, the other surface ships, behind as a distraction, came in with 2 carriers. And instead of bombs, they carried bags of flour. And he attacked on a Sunday morning, and the problem was declared, he won the war. All the graders won the war. But then other people said, wait a second, that's not fair. You know, attacking on a Sunday morning is an inconvenient time. But here's the other one, and I have this in italics, because I will tell you this is almost embarrassing to show. Everyone knew those Asians don't have hand-eye coordination. They can't do precision bombing. And the thing was overruled. And we did not learn, as my good friend David said, from history in this case. Now, the U.S. started preparing. There was an Admiral Richardson, J.O. Richardson, who wanted to take Pearl Harbor and move the entire fleet to the West Coast. He said, I got better bases there. I can resupply faster. I can sit there and repair faster. But you have to understand the situation the president was in. He's trying to keep Britain alive. I mean, Britain could have been overthrown, and he's trying to do things like Lend-Lease. You say, what's the big problem there? Well, there's a whole lot of people in Congress said, time out. We're not going to get involved in that European war. So he's on one side trying to appease the isolationists. He's on the other side of trying to get supplies to keep Britain alive in case we had to go into it. And he's got everybody saying, hey, our military's in bad shape. You got to do something. Now, the Army was responsible for base defense. And the deal was if the Navy got engaged at a fight at sea, the Army would provide all the support they could, meaning the aircraft, and the Navy be in charge. It was an attack on land. It was the other way around. And that's a lot nicer said, and it's easy to put on paper, and it's a lot harder to do in the action. Especially when you look at some of the government bureaucracy. Radar is a new invention. Radar was available. Best places for a permanent radar stable, they had the mobile ones, but they were short range. The best places for permanent radar sites was on the parkland. And the Army had to comply with Department of Interior regulations. And instead of getting the permanent radar sites in June, 6 months before Pearl Harbor, they were still under construction while they went through the bureaucracy. When you say the overlapping chains of command, well, there were several admirals, and one of them, who had played a key role in the aviation, reported to Kimball as the Pacific Fleet Commander and had a boss in Washington, D.C. And the Army guys who were responsible at base were sitting there having to deal with all these people. So it was a confusing bureaucracy. The Congress actually allocated $245 million to expand naval bases in February of that year. That's $5 billion today. But as anyone knows, authorizing the money to get things built doesn't happen overnight. There were also warnings of potential attack. There were messages that were sent out, one in October, two in November, and they said, this is a warning of war. Now that's pretty clear. Negotiations have broken down. Get ready. But at the same time, these people are saying, well, where are the resources to get ready with? The ships were kept in the harbor. There were no anti-torpedo nets. Well, they didn't need them, because Pearl Harbor is a shallow harbor. And the torpedoes dropped from the torpedo planes would go down, they dive deep and come back up, but they would get sunk in the harbor. The other thing is, they sat there and they're worried about sabotage. Radar teams were still in training. They were only operating the radar 3 hours a day, because that's when the guys are likely to attack. And unarmed aircraft were parked close together so they wouldn't be sabotaged. And the U.S. forces have been on alert, but they're taken off the day before. There are also immediate warnings. I'm talking about the day of. The radar report. The radar was shut down at 7. This young soldier radar operator was in training. He continued to practice. He said, hey, I got a warning of a huge number of aircraft coming in. This lieutenant said, it's a B-25, it's coming to the West Coast. Don't worry about it. A minesweeper sights a Japanese submarine. The ward actually dropped depth charges on another submarine. And the report was being confirmed when the Japanese attacked. Now, you also have to understand this is a coordinated attack. This was going against U.S. and U.K. bases across the Pacific. And this was especially concerning to Churchill because he was already fighting for his life in Europe, and he did not need to have the third part of the tripartite, Italy, Japan, and Germany, get into this fight. This was the Japanese strike force. Now, I love this. This is the extent at which they were preparing. They built a model harbor to prepare for the attack. So you had the 6 attack carriers. This was mainly to protect the carriers, and you had these miniature submarines, 2-man crew, 2 torpedoes. You got to understand, they are moving a huge fleet across the Pacific. This is high risk. They have to bring it in position to launch without being discovered. Now, I mentioned the torpedoes. This is ingenious. You can see where the conventional torpedo would hit the ground, and then it would level up and come back up. So the Japanese developed a box, a little wooden box over the back of the propeller. And when this hit the water, the box disintegrated or broke apart, but it prevented it from going deep. It came shallow. And so the aerial torpedoes became an incredibly effective weapon. All right, the Japanese attacked at 7:55 in the morning, 183 aircraft. Very similar to the number that General or Admiral Yarnell did 9 years prior. They attacked Pearl Harbor, Hickam Airfield, and other targets. The code to launch was climb Mount Niitaka. And when the aircraft got over Pearl and knew that they had achieved surprise, they radioed back Tora, Tora, Tora. A second wave came in consisting of 168 aircraft. The U.S. losses were devastating. 68 civilians killed, 35 wounded. Some of those civilians were killed from friendly fire, where ships and other people were firing at the aircraft, and those bullets fall down somewhere. This is some of the devastation. This one's Hickam Field. That's the destroyer Shaw exploding. That's the USS Oklahoma. And that is the Arizona. Japanese losses were about 3% of the U.S. losses. And if you look at the strategic loss, it was much greater than that. Medal of Honor recipients, 15 of them, 14 at Pearl Harbor, 1 at Midway. But anyone who's served can tell you there are a whole lot of other stories we'll never know about. Now let's talk about the leaders. The American side, there's Admiral Kimmel and General Short. Both had been taken command that year. Kimmel had been replaced, the admiral who is insisting to move the fleet back to the West Coast. So these men didn't have much time to prepare. Both, as you can see, had incredible experience, incredible records. There's a great story about Admiral Kimmel. He is at his office during the attack. He's looking out the window, and he's seeing devastation. He's seeing his airmen, his Marines, his children dying. He's seeing the ships being destroyed. I mean, I can just imagine how he's feeling. And a .50 caliber bullet comes through the window and grazes his uniform. And he turns to his communication officer and said, "It would have been more merciful if it had killed me." Admiral Yamamoto was command of the entire Japanese campaign across the Pacific. Incredible individual, studied at Harvard, had another assignment as an attaché. He knew and appreciated the industrial strength of the United States. He was one of the few. But he had a very low opinion of the U.S. Navy. He said the U.S. Navy is nothing but a club for bridge players and golfers, which I'm going to tell you is a ridiculous statement because everyone knows the Navy guys are lousy golfers. Admiral Chichi. He was not experienced in aviation. He was commanding the fleet, those 6 carriers and the other surface who were doing the attack. Now this is important, and we're going to discuss this later. Yamamoto, avid and skilled gambler. Chichi, very cautious, very conservative. These two gentlemen were both relieved of command and reduced in rank, though that was reversed in the 1990s. And there's been a lot of argument, did they receive all the proper information, the guidance and intelligence? Yamamoto, well, through intelligence, they tracked down his aircraft as he was going visiting some of the fleet, and they set a trap, and he was killed. Chichi committed suicide in 1944. There was a lone light on a dark day. The carriers, the 3 carriers in the Pacific, were not at Pearl. 2 were delivering aircraft to the islands, and 1 was on the West Coast. Now, the good news is they were not there to be attacked and suffer the damage. The other good news is Chichi, very conservative, didn't know where they were at, and he was afraid of a counterattack. And you remember, this is a time when he's got aircraft coming back, refueling, rearming. He's sending he's a sitting duck. And he says, this isn't worth it. And he skedaddles. They go west. He said, we've done enough damage. But the key thing is the fuel depots, the submarine base, repaired shops, the dry dock, in addition to the carriers, were left untouched. What about those targets? Now you got to remember, Yamamoto, he's a gambler. I'm sure he's saying, "You did what?" So they come up with Operation K. Now IJN is Imperial Japanese Navy, just in case you hadn't picked up on that. They're going to take 5 flying boats. These are basically seaplanes. They're going to fly them from the Marshall Islands up here, be refueled by submarine, and then attack Hawaii and attack those. They're going to bomb these. That's a flying boat. They're huge. Every Navy in World War II had amphibious aircraft. They were used for different missions. In fact, in the 1930s, as Bob was kind enough to point out to me through an article, there are a lot of people in the Navy said, scrap those carriers, let's have fleets of flying boats. And they did have seaplane tenders that would go out and serve them. But the decision was on carriers. Now, about this same time, a month later, is the Doolittle raid. And of course, victors get to write the history. So these are about the same time, and I'm sure many of you know about the Doolittle raid. Both these operations relied on surprise. The Emily's were flying out being refueled by a submarine. The Japanese did not even consider that the bombers could take off from a carrier. And they never did figure that out. And as an interesting side note, they thought that the U.S. had developed a much longer range bomber than existed before. So when they had their initial perimeter of this is how we're going to protect Japan, and we're going to have all these islands, which means that's out of airplane range, now they have to extend it to a larger circle, a larger radius. I knew that math would pay off sometime. But when you have a larger circumference, you thin out your forces, which did assist, not make it easy, but made it a little less difficult for the campaign coming back. Operation K was reduced to only 2 aircraft because of losses, because of other missions. Doolittle raid had 25 aircraft. The Operation K was longer. The Doolittle raid was 2,000 miles. And if any of you know, most of the aircraft of Doolittle raid had to ditch. They ran out of fuel. Now, let's look at the 2 aircraft involved. Well, the Emily was twice the size, twice as long, twice as wide, and it was faster. Crew of 10 is basically a huge flying fort. Faster speed, comparable bomb loads, and a longer range. And you're going to say, wait a second, you said that the Doolittle raid was 2,000 miles, and you're telling me it only had a range of 1,350. And the reason why is on B-25s, they took out all the guns, took out all the weight they could, and then they put an extra fuel tank. And that's the way they extended it to make the range. It's one of my favorite military quotes. The polite translation is, you got to get lucky. Only 2 of Emily's were available. So they reduced the target list just to the dry dock. Had they been able to destroy the dry dock, the fuel, the repair shops, the submarine base, they would have delayed the U.S. recovery by at least 6 months. They also assumed clear weather. Now, they did have a submarine in Hawaii that was supposed to give them a local weather check. That submarine disappeared. Don't know it was an accident, it was sunk. They didn't have a local weather check. They had broken the U.S. weather code, which has changed regularly the day before, but they weren't able to transmit that. So the 2 Emily's launched in bad weather. Well, that meant they avoided the U.S. interceptors, also meant they couldn't find the targets. They were able to bomb a hillside and some open water. Now the U.S., and I said the Navy, but I'm going to say U.S. forces, reacted by increasing aerial reconnaissance and by stationing vessels at frigate shoals so they could not refuel at that spot, because that was a very good protected spot to refuel the Emily's. You're going to find out that increasing aerial reconnaissance also contributed to Midway. Yamamoto's pre-war forecast, when asked by the emperor, can you be successful? He basically said, yeah, for 6 months, because he understood the American industrial capability better than anybody else. 6 months later, almost to the day, was Midway. The Imperial Navy lost 4 carriers, all of which had been at Pearl Harbor. The U.S. lost the Yorktown. And the Yorktown was not sunk at Midway. It was badly damaged. It was limping back to Pearl. And it was sunk by a Japanese submarine. And it's an interesting anecdote that the Yorktown CV-5 was sunk. The Bonhomme Richard was being constructed, and they renamed it the Yorktown. In fact, my wife has told me that you could actually go down on the keel, and there's still in the Yorktown at Charleston is Bonhomme Richard. The Japanese could not believe that we would ever rename a ship after one they sunk. That wouldn't be honorable. And this just blew their intelligence. We sank that. I know we sank. You told me that we sank that ship. And this really caused them a lot of problems. Thank goodness. Now, what's in the aftermath? Well, this is another quote of Yamamoto. In 1941, there were 6 fleet aircraft carriers and 4 light carriers. The U.S. had 7 carriers, but only 3 in the Pacific. 10-3 advantage. During the war, Japanese Navy built 7 attack carriers, 6 light escort carriers. And they're very ingenious in this. In one case, they had a battleship that they left the front turrets on and put a deck behind the superstructure for landing aircraft. They're doing everything they could. Many of these aircraft carriers that they built never completed their sea trials because the U.S. blew them out of the water. At that same time, the U.S. had 33 attack carriers and 123 escort carriers. Escort carriers would carry around 1/3 the aircraft as the battle carriers. And they were used to support beach landings, protect convoys, things like this. Now, if anyone wants to come in and say, wait a second, I saw something and it wasn't 7 and 6, it was 9 and 4. I would tell you what, I come up with so many numbers from different sources, and they're all close. And that's one of the things about history. Now, that's what the industrial capability of the United States was able to do. Remember, those golfers and bridge players did pretty good. Here's another interesting fact. The Japanese made little effort to recover downed pilots. I mean, this is part of their culture. You're shot down, you die with honor. The U.S. made a tremendous effort to recover pilots, including one who later became a president. Now, I just want to add a couple of things. We talk about the numbers and we talk about the damages done. I want to try to put ourselves in the shoes of some of these sailors, some of these airmen. Dory Miller was a cook. Cooks were not even given weapons training. And Dory Miller went up to the bridge of the West Virginia, recovered the captain and some of the other officers were badly wounded, and then went down and started manning a machine gun. I guess it was on-the-job training. Dory Miller died later in the war. You know, of the 15 Medal of Honor recipients, 5 lived out the day, 4 lived out the war. The rest died. The Utah was getting up on a normal Sunday morning, 8 o'clock, raising the flag. Now, the Utah had been a World War I battleship that had been downgraded, which they called a target ship, and it would tow the targets when they did naval gunnery practice. So here they are, 8 o'clock, raising the flag, and I'm sure the first reaction was, what idiot called an alert? We just came off alert yesterday. What idiot put live bombs on those planes? Those aren't our planes. The flag was raised to half staff and remain there for the day. There were 58 sailors killed on the Utah. 54 still interned. There was also the ashes of an infant who had died, and the father was going to take her to sea on the next sailing to spread the ashes. He survived the war, but when he died, he asked if his ashes could be interred with his daughter on the Utah. There are incredible stories. I briefly mentioned the 15 Medal of Honor recipients. I don't have the time, I don't have the expertise to tell you all the stories, but I have a lady right there who can. She has written blogs. This is my wife, Christine. She has written blogs for the Medal of Honor Society. She's given tours, she's given lectures, and she drags me around the world to visit the graves of her Medal of Honor recipients. And I do my part. I carry the bags and the credit card. Thank you all. I see most of you have met the standard. Any questions?